The poster boys of the startup world. We are talking about Paytm and Byju. They've been in the public eye for a long time, but lately for all the wrong reasons, at least over the past few weeks, that's been the case. Apart from regulatory actions, there have been legal battles and there have been many other issues that have been plaguing these startups. And now, fearing the further heat that might come upon them, the employees of both these firms, of these companies, they're looking at jumping ship. We understand that as many as 13,500 people are ready to jump ship because that's what the statistics are indicating. Thousands of employees looking for alternatives now more than before. So the question is this the end of the startup dream in India? And to discuss what's really going on and how this fundamentally changes our perception and our outlook of India's startup ecosystem, let's connect with the co-founder and independent director of TeamLease, Rituparna Chakraborty is with us, and with her, Aditya Narayan Mishra, the managing director and CEO of Ciel HR Services. Thank you both for making the time for this conversation. You know, I was reading some of that data put out by the staffing firm Exfino, and they're saying that more than 3/4 of the Byjus and Paytm employees who are looking out for jobs, they're in the salary bracket of 5 and 10 lakh rupees. And many of them have less than 4 years of work experience. So that's the kind of profile of people who are looking out and looking at jumping ship right now, at least in both these firms. Rituparna, how troubling is this scenario right now? For these guys in particular, how severe is the slowdown in the startup ecosystem? And how much worse do you think it's going to become with all these people now actively seeking jobs?
Situations like this are always extremely disappointing, and more so for the individuals who are getting directly affected or potentially can get directly affected. But having said that, I think we've been seeing over the past 3-4 years how the startup ecosystems, and I'm sure over the last 3-4 years, there have been many learnings for all of those who have been, continuing to work in such organizations. And my view on this situation, honestly, is that given the salary bracket and given the volumes, these are people who have the kind of skill sets which are potentially fungible. And I do believe that while initially, maybe for 40-45 days, things could be a little challenging, but I do feel that there are alternative options. These people have, in spite of whatever has happened to some of these organizations, I think a lot of these people have clear, definite skill sets which can be utilized and can be of value to the others. I think the important thing is not to lose calm, not to be too desperate, not to panic, and just be persistent in terms of research, and of course not repeat the same mistake.
Yes, as optimistic as you're sounding, Rituparna, it is tough at this point in time. These people who are looking at jumping ship at this stage, Aditya Mishra, how do you read this? Does this now fundamentally change the lure of the startup world for the new additions to the workforce? Would they, in your understanding, consciously choose not to work for a startup now, even if the pay upfront is higher?
No, I think it is for those concerned individuals, it is depressing, it is disappointing. However, I think that the startup ecosystem of our country is extremely solid. The talent that's available in India has time and again proven its value. The investors, the entrepreneurs, the idea factory that India has is tremendous. I don't think it has got a long-term impact, and in the short term, right now, there will be a blip in the attractiveness of this ecosystem. I think it is just a matter of 3 to 6 months for this storm to settle down, is what I read. People are talented, the ecosystem is strong, the whole world is looking up to the capability of the startup ecosystem of India and its ability to deliver world-class products that's going to be liked all over. So I think in the long term, it's not a problem at all.
Fair enough. Like you mentioned, world-class products. That's the promise to the world. That's the strength of the Indian startup ecosystem. And here we are talking about two of the most celebrated startups in recent times. Rituparna, how deep does this run when you look at the fundamentals going ahead with this kind of shakeup that we are currently seeing in the Indian startup universe? Both of you are in sync saying that this is going to be a temporary storm. It will pass in 4 to 6 months. But will it lead to a stricter screening at the regulatory level to weed out the non-starters, so to speak? Or do you think this is the nature of the startup beast anywhere in the world where you have to contend with these shakeups?
Whether it's part of the scope of today's conversation, but nonetheless, I'd like to make few comments. I don't think the organizations that we're talking about can continue to be called startups because they are massively large organizations, and we know the kind of valuation that we are talking about. So what essentially we all have to take responsibility for that under our nose, these two organizations grew to such scale with how many people were sleeping on the job? I mean, how did it even get to the situation? So, and honestly, who is at the receiving end of it? The employees who end up at the receiving end of it. And I do agree with Aditya, and like I've been mentioning, that I think for the individuals, yes, it's going to be a little bit of a heartbreak for the next 40 days, but they will move on. They have the skill sets. They'll find. But essentially, I think there is a lot of questioning that everyone has to be doing. All organizations need to be doing that. What's going on with governance? What's going on with compliance? What is this mad rush to chase top line growth without paying attention to the basic fundamental details? Can you really achieve success and grow organizations without following and adhering to the basic fundamentals of running a business? I think these are some of the larger questions that we need to understand. And my only message, honestly, for the youth, I don't think we should ever dissuade people. Then talking about and beating up the Indian startup system is not essentially going to solve the purpose. I think we need to encourage the startups. We need these organizations. Yes, there will be some failures down the line, but not of the kind that we're seeing with these two organizations. This is a different problem altogether. So I personally feel that, yes, the employees need to be, or any incumbent or anyone who's a job seeker need to be very careful about the basic fundamentals. I mean, just because all that glitters is not gold, just because there's a large number of funds which are being raised, which are being honestly spent in making you look all glitzy, doesn't necessarily make this an organization or some organization the ones where you can bet your future or your career with. So I think
Yes.
some amount of discretion and judgment needs to apply whether these organizations do pass the smell test.
Yes, perhaps that is going to be the evolution of the Indian startup ecosystem. But by and large, the growth of the startup universe, this kind of shakeup perhaps can be expected. Of course, this is room for innovation. The entire startup ecosystem promises out-of-the-box ideas with the accent on profitability. The question is this going to make young entrepreneurs think and act differently when they're setting up a new business? But even apart from that, Aditya, how is this shakeup going to impact salaries and appraisal-led hikes in CTCs? Whether they are edtech or fintech, in the face of layoffs, in the face of salary delays, will the excess supply of our active workforce in the job market bring down pay scales across sectors, whether they are tech or non-tech?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all know from our common principles that anything which is frothy will settle down. A bubble is going to burst. So anything which kind of expands very fast, like what we saw in the COVID period, that every organization thought that we are all going digital, and hence we need a huge amount of technology, and hence there was a huge war for talent, and that's how the compensation kind of became really so high. And we just let the forces automatically take it almost to that frothy level. But this kind of a shakeup brings some degree of sanity to the system, if I may say so. So if the organization is kind of creating certain kind of value, then that value needs to be estimated properly. So it brings to the question of valuation, the ESOPs, the kind of variable pays, the kind of salaries, benefits that employees were offered just to attract them, or help them jump from one ship to the other. I think some of those practices, from an HR standpoint, they're possibly not the best of those, but they were practiced just out of tremendous amount of competition. Possibly for the system on an overall basis, this is a shakeup which was possibly needed, and it will come to a little bit of better stability, in my opinion, and it will actually strengthen the future of the system as a whole, is what I feel. And HR directors, the leaders, the startup founders, all of them will kind of learn to drive the whole thing with
Yes.
Ambition,
Yes.
aspiration, also with responsibility.
Yes, so various checks and balances is something that the entire startup sector requires, and perhaps we're going to have more of that in times to come. More of the regulatory nature, the governance issues that Rituparna is talking about, that can be expected, even though there is this storm that is brewing and it is gaining that kind of momentum right now. We'll see how the shake-up really changes the startup universe in India with all the promise that it brings to the table. Thank you, Rituparna and Aditya, for joining us on this discussion.